Have you ever stopped to wonder why the inner world of women seems so intricate, so layered, and at the same time, so captivating? To many men, it feels like a puzzle with missing pieces, a constant mystery that shifts with every glance and every word. Yet the truth is that there are patterns, emotional rhythms that repeat themselves, and when you recognize them, you begin to understand that the so-called mystery of the female mind is not about confusion, it is about depth. What I am going to share with you is not a set of tricks, and it is certainly not a strategy for control. It is a journey into 9 emotional aspects that affect many women, aspects that psychology, culture, and human experience have revealed time and again. Think of this less as rules and more as windows. Each aspect is a window that lets you see a little more clearly into the emotional life of women, not to judge or to manipulate, but to connect. And as you listen, you may discover something unexpected. These are not just female experiences. They are profoundly human experiences, but they manifest more vividly, more intensely, in women because of a unique combination of biology, upbringing, and social expectation. The first of these emotional aspects is the constant search for validation. In today's digital age, where an image can travel the world in seconds and a single post can attract thousands of eyes, the need to be seen, acknowledged, and affirmed has only intensified. Many women spend hours perfecting a photo, not because they are shallow, but because every like, every kind word, every small signal of approval touches a deep psychological chord. It lights up the brain with the same pleasure circuits as a reward. Validation is not vanity. It is a way of saying, I exist. I am noticed. This is where many men misunderstand. They think the way to show care is to flood a woman with endless compliments, to like every picture, to praise every detail. But when validation becomes constant, it loses its meaning. It becomes background noise. True validation, the kind that reaches the heart, is not about repetition. It is about intention. A simple, "You look radiant tonight," said at the right moment can weigh more than 100 shallow comments. When you recognize that behind the perfectly arranged photo or the confident smile, there might be a silent question, am I enough? You understand that your words should be sincere, measured, and real. That is when validation becomes connection instead of habit. But as powerful as validation is, it is not the only force shaping attraction and connection. The second emotional aspect is women's complex relationship with uncertainty. While stability is important in any relationship, monotony can smother the spark. Predictability brings comfort, but it can also dim desire. Many women, even if they never put it into words, feel that too much routine makes a relationship lifeless. Their minds and hearts are wired to respond to novelty, to moments that break the script. A surprise message, an unplanned evening, an unexpected gesture. All of these fuel the flame of curiosity and attraction. Psychologists call it intermittent reinforcement, the unpredictable spark that keeps people coming back for more. It is the same principle that makes stories gripping and keeps people glued to a game they can't quite predict. In relationships, uncertainty works in a similar way. It is not about playing games or being manipulative. It is about remembering that passion thrives in contrast. Too much routine breeds boredom. Too much chaos breeds fear. The balance lies in being steady enough to create trust, yet surprising enough to inspire excitement. A woman who doesn't know exactly what tomorrow will bring feels alive in the presence of mystery. When a man understands this, he doesn't have to become unpredictable in destructive ways. He simply brings freshness into the ordinary. And this leads us to the third emotional aspect, one of the most transformative of all, the emotional mirror. Imagine walking into a room carrying the weight of a difficult day. You sit in silence, hoping someone notices, but instead they ask, "What's wrong?" It feels flat, almost mechanical. Now imagine someone looks into your eyes, sees the tension in your shoulders, hears the weariness in your voice, and says, "You seem drained, like you've been carrying more than usual today." That is the difference between listening to words and listening to emotions. For women, the need to feel deeply understood, to have their inner state recognized without endless explanations, is immense. When a man becomes that emotional mirror, something extraordinary happens. The bond deepens instantly. It is not about solving problems or rushing to fix what's broken. It is about reflecting what is felt, sometimes even before it is spoken. Neuroscience tells us that when someone names our feelings accurately, it releases oxytocin, the chemical of trust and bonding. For a woman, that moment can feel like a revelation. Finally, someone sees me. Someone understands without me having to fight for words. Most men either ignore emotions hoping they'll pass, or jump into problem solving as if every tear or silence were a puzzle to fix. But the mirror is different. It is quiet presence, attention sharpened, empathy expressed. And when a woman experiences that, she often responds with relief, with gratitude, and with an openness she rarely gives to anyone else. This is not manipulation. It is humanity at its highest form. The ability to be there, to reflect, to make someone feel recognized in their invisible battles. These first three aspects, the craving for validation, the magnetism of uncertainty, and the need for an emotional mirror, already paint a powerful picture of the female emotional landscape. But they are only the beginning. As we continue, we will step into even deeper territory, exploring fears that hide behind smiles, needs that remain unspoken, and sensitivities that go beyond logic. And once you see those truths, it may not only change the way you relate to women, it may transform the way you understand yourself. As we move further into this journey of understanding, we come across a hidden undercurrent that shapes countless interactions, yet rarely gets spoken of directly. Behind laughter, behind confidence, behind the strong and capable presence that so many women project, there lies a quiet anxiety that has echoed through history. It is not weakness, but a deep-rooted human instinct, the fear of being replaced. This fourth emotional aspect may not be confessed openly, yet it is one of the most powerful. Long ago, survival often depended on bonds. To be abandoned or replaced could mean vulnerability, even danger. That ancient imprint still lingers. Today, being replaced doesn't threaten survival, but emotionally it can stir the same primal alarm. A woman may feel it when her partner's attention drifts, when another presence seems to pull focus, or even when silence leaves too much space for imagination. This fear can show itself as subtle insecurity, as protectiveness, or as worry that she is not enough. For many men, the instinct is to dismiss it or to get defensive. But real understanding means acknowledging that this fear is not irrational. It is historical, biological, and emotional all at once. The response that creates connection is not judgment, but reassurance. Not reassurance in words alone, but in consistent actions that say, "You matter. You are seen. Your place here is not in question." When a woman feels that steady confidence, the anxiety softens, and space opens for trust and peace. Yet if that fear is triggered carelessly, it can spiral into jealousy or doubt. And in those moments, the role of a man is not to criticize, but to meet the fear with patience, clarity, and grounding presence. Understanding this fear doesn't just help women, it reshapes men, teaching them that reassurance and steadiness are not weakness, but strength. From this point, we step into the fifth emotional aspect, the need for emotional safety. While physical security is important, what many women long for on a deeper level is a safe emotional space. Life comes with storms, expectations, pressures, family challenges, and inner chaos. And when those storms hit, what makes the difference is not someone who tries to control or silence, but someone who can be calm in the middle of the storm. Many men, when faced with a wave of emotion, become uncomfortable. They try to fix things quickly, apologize excessively, or withdraw to avoid the discomfort. But what creates lasting respect and trust is not avoidance or frantic solutions. It is presence. It is the ability to stand firm while the storm rages, to lower one's voice when emotions rise, to meet intensity with calm. When a man is able to hold that space without breaking, something powerful awakens inside a woman, the sense that she can bring her most chaotic self and still be safe. This does not mean tolerating harm or accepting disrespect. Emotional safety is not about becoming a punching bag. It is about becoming a steady anchor. It means saying with your presence, "I will not crumble because you are hurting. I can hold space until the wave passes." When a woman feels this, she often feels both admiration and relief. She knows she has found not just a partner, but a refuge. That sense of safety is profoundly addictive, not because it creates dependency, but because it reveals a level of trust that few people ever offer. It shows her that she does not have to carry her storms alone. And from here, we arrive at the sixth emotional aspect, sensitivity to social standing. At first glance, this is often misunderstood. People reduce it to money or material success, but in truth, it runs much deeper. It is about respect. Women have developed, both culturally and biologically, a finely tuned radar for how others perceive and respond to the man beside them. They notice the subtle cues, how a waiter reacts, how friends greet him, how strangers acknowledge him. These micro-interactions tell a story that words often cannot. It isn't about arrogance, nor about commanding attention through force. It is about presence. A man who carries himself with quiet confidence, who treats others with respect, who naturally receives acknowledgement from those around him, radiates an aura of value. Women feel this deeply. It doesn't mean they measure worth by income or titles. It means they instinctively connect social respect with safety and stability. A man who is respected in the outside world seems, to her subconscious mind, more likely to provide security and more likely to navigate life with strength. The trap many fall into is to fake this presence, to try to impress with flash or exaggeration. But authenticity always speaks louder. True social respect comes from congruence, the alignment of how you see yourself and how the world sees you. It is revealed in small acts, the kindness you show to someone serving you, the calm confidence with which you enter a room, the way your words and your posture carry weight without needing to dominate. Women read these signals with astonishing accuracy. They are not always looking for wealth. They are looking for dignity, presence, and earned respect. When a woman feels proud to stand beside a man because of the way he moves in the world, the attraction grows in ways that are hard to describe. It is not about vanity, it is about alignment. To her, it is a sign that she is with someone others respect, someone who carries his life with substance. That recognition strengthens the bond, because admiration and attraction often walk hand in hand. These three aspects, the fear of replacement, the longing for emotional safety, and the sensitivity to social standing, reveal another layer of the female emotional experience. They show us that behind beauty and strength lies vulnerability, but also incredible discernment. Women sense inconsistencies, read environments, and carry instincts that reach back generations. To understand these truths is not to hold power over them, but to build relationships where compassion, presence, and respect become the pillars. And yet, even with all this, the journey is not over. Because the final three aspects take us to the deepest levels of connection and respect. They are not just about how women feel, but about how men choose to stand. These last pieces of the puzzle reveal why authenticity and self-respect are non-negotiable, and why the strongest relationships are built not on control, but on the union of two whole, dignified human beings. We now reach the final stage of this journey, and what remains are the emotional aspects that cut to the very heart of connection. These last three truths are not about temporary attraction or fleeting charm. They go deeper into the foundations of trust, admiration, and respect. To understand them is to see that relationships are not built on appearances or clever words, but on authenticity and self-worth. The seventh emotional aspect is a woman's sensitivity to coherence between words and actions. For many women, integrity is not a luxury, it is a requirement. They notice when promises do not align with behavior, when statements lack follow-through, when words are empty. And this sensitivity does not apply only to men, it applies to themselves as well. When a woman declares that honesty matters most, but later finds herself acting against that value, she feels the tension. When someone close to her gently reflects that inconsistency without aggression or judgment, it creates a moment of truth. This is not about catching someone in hypocrisy or using their words against them. It is about valuing authenticity so highly that you are willing to hold up a mirror, even when it is uncomfortable. For a woman, to be around a man who notices details, who listens carefully, and who remembers what she has said is both unsettling and magnetic. Unsettling, because it leaves no room for illusions. Magnetic, because it shows attentiveness and courage. A man who can calmly, respectfully say, "But you told me honesty mattered most to you. How does that fit with this choice?" Invites reflection instead of conflict. The experience can feel confronting, but at the same time it builds trust, because it shows he is paying attention on a deeper level. Women rarely forget the feeling of being seen so clearly, and paradoxically, it often increases their respect and attraction. From there, we move into the eighth emotional aspect, the scarcity of authentic masculine presence. In today's world, Many men struggle with insecurity, doubt, and a constant hunger for approval. They second-guess themselves, avoid making decisions, or try too hard to please. As a result, authentic masculine presence has become rare, and its rarity makes it profoundly attractive. This presence is not about dominance or aggression. It is not about controlling others. True masculine energy is steady, calm, and assured. It is the ability to carry responsibility without panic, to face challenges without collapsing, to radiate quiet confidence instead of loud arrogance. When a woman encounters a man who carries himself this way, it touches something deep within her. It activates her trust, her admiration, her sense of safety. It awakens her own femininity, allowing her to relax into who she is without fear. And the truth is, authentic masculine presence is not something you fake. It cannot be achieved by memorizing lines or copying behaviors. It comes from within, from self-knowledge, from discipline, from choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, integrity over shortcuts. A man who possesses this presence does not need to announce it. Others feel it when he walks into a room. Women sense it instinctively, as though a subtle current of energy has shifted. And in a world where uncertainty and instability often dominate, that presence feels like water in a desert. Finally, we arrive at the 9th emotional aspect, perhaps the most decisive of all: unshakable self-respect. Everything else may create attraction, but self-respect is what sustains it. A woman may be drawn to charm, to mystery, to charisma. But if she senses that a man has no standards, no boundaries, no backbone, the attraction withers. On the other hand, when she sees a man who values himself, who has clear principles, who will walk away rather than accept treatment that diminishes him, her respect grows immeasurably. Unshakable self-respect does not mean arrogance. It does not mean refusing to compromise or always having to be right. It means knowing your worth so clearly that you cannot be bought by approval, and you cannot be shaken by rejection. When a man demonstrates this, he sends a message. I want you, but I don't need you to define me. My value is not negotiable. For many women, this is one of the most powerful signals of all. It transforms the relationship dynamic from one of grasping need to one of chosen connection. She recognizes that being with him is not a right, but a privilege. And in that recognition, her admiration and devotion often deepen. These 9 emotional aspects together create a tapestry of understanding. They show us that women, like men, are a mix of vulnerability and strength, of fears and hopes, of instincts and choices. They remind us that relationships are not built by chance, but by awareness, by recognizing what is happening beneath the surface and responding with empathy, respect, and authenticity. And perhaps the greatest revelation of all is that these truths are not only about women. They reflect the universal human condition. We all crave validation, we all fear being replaced, we all long for safety, we all measure coherence, we all respect presence, and we all admire self-worth. To understand women in these terms is also to understand ourselves more deeply. So let this not be knowledge you use to manipulate, but wisdom you use to elevate. The highest purpose of understanding is not control, but connection. It is about creating relationships where both people rise, where both feel seen, respected, and valued. Because in the end, the most magnetic power a man can possess is not charm or strategy, it is integrity. And the greatest gift a woman can receive is not perfection, but presence. The presence of someone who sees her clearly, respects himself fully, and chooses to walk beside her with authenticity. When you carry yourself with that kind of presence, when you hold to that kind of self-respect, when you understand these emotional landscapes with compassion, something shifts. Attraction stops being a game, and love becomes what it was always meant to be, the place where 2 souls grow stronger together.